On the show today, we have guest Dr. Genevieve Erker-Caffrey. Dr. Genevieve Erker-Caffrey is a former elementary and middle school teacher and the founder of Schema Curriculum and Consulting, a K-12 social studies professional learning organization. Over 12 years in classrooms across St. Louis, Chicago, and Guadalajara, Mexico, she became increasingly concerned by the marginalization of social studies and the lack of coherent guidance for teaching complex, high-emotion topics. Her doctoral research at the University of Missouri-Columbia culminated in the creation of the P.O.W.E.R framework, a curriculum design model that helps educators build inquiry, discourse, and civic agency into their everyday practice. Get ready for a great episode.
I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-created curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Dr. Genevieve Erker-Caffrey, welcome to the Time for Teachership podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I am very excited to be here.
I also am super excited. And so I love that before we hit record, you said that you are like a frameworks expert. I'm also like a nerd of frameworks. And so I'm really excited. Historically, people should totally listen to, and I think we should link this in the show notes as well. Your episode on visions of education around the Let's Act framework was brilliant and I loved it. And now today we're talking about the P.O.W.E.R framework, which is so cool. And so situated in my mind in the context of like student leadership and awesome curriculum design and doing school differently and transformatively. Like, this is really rich and I'm excited to get into the conversation. I'd love to know if there are things that you want the audience to kind of be thinking about or have in their mind as we go through today.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that if teachers, coaches, I know that your audience is varied, but I think the thing that I would try to think about is when you were planning curriculum and trying to make it quote unquote equity oriented or justice oriented, what exactly are you thinking about and what are those components and where do you feel like you do a really good job of which components do you feel like you do a really good job and where do you feel like you get a little lost? Like what exact topics or identity groups are you feeling like, I don't know how to make this equity oriented? And I'm hoping that this conversation and the P.O.W.E.R framework can provide a little bit of guidance for specifying what it is we're actually talking about when we say justice-oriented curriculum, especially justice-oriented social studies curriculum, which is my area of expertise. And then once we identify those components, what do those really truly look like in curriculum and instruction? Because oftentimes it can just feel kind of elusive. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, okay, we're talking about diversity, we're talking about making the world a better place, we're talking about, so it's something that I craved as a teacher to help with that guidance. But I'm hoping that the P.O.W.E.R framework provides a little bit more guidance, not to simplify the ideas because it is complex. This is a complex endeavor, but to help provide a little bit of clarity and coherence so that we can dig deeper into complexity.
I love that framing. Well, very well said. I want to start, as I start all episodes, kind of with this idea of freedom dreaming. So Dr. Bettina Love describes these as dreams grounded in the critique of injustice. And so curious what your big dream is. Maybe this is a bit of kind of a why behind the framework. Maybe this is a bit of a lot of things, but curious what the dream is for you.
Well, my dream is that every single child experiences a phenomenal, justice-centered, dynamic, engaging social education, social studies education, or education in general, but specifically when talking about history and civics and geography and economics and these concepts that are um, so consequential for the ways that we live our lives and the decisions that we make. I hope my dream is that every student receives that kind of education because some have. You know, there are some phenomenal teachers and some amazing curricula out there that that certain children are lucky enough to experience. Usually it's piecemeal. It depends on the teacher, that depends on the unit. They get not a lot of kids get it K through 12, but my dream would be that every child gets it K through 12, which means every teacher would need to feel equipped, confident with delivering that kind of curriculum. And that is easier said than done. And something that I've found in my work is that I've spent a lot of my research has been with teachers who have a critical equity oriented mindset or commitments, and they're actually even administrators are supportive. Even the districts that I've worked in are not restrictive, but still there is this struggle to figure it out. And I've kind of realized that a lot of the problems are organizational. There's a big fragmentation of the infrastructure, the curricular infrastructure of specifically elementary social studies education. There's so much great stuff out there, but it's all over the place and it's a mess and it's fragmented, and that is dizzying for teachers. And then there are so many frameworks, justice-oriented frameworks that are fantastic, phenomenal, and needed, but teachers get overwhelmed by them. So my dream is now, like now on a more practical level for myself, is to provide both services that can guide districts, schools, um, or publishing companies, teams of educators of any kind, to finding the, or to, I would like to train these teachers, these educators in understanding the overarching arc of what it means to do social studies education in a justice-oriented way, and then equip them with the not just the resources, but the theories and the thinking tools, and then eventually the students having those thinking tools that so that they are able to think with theory. I think a lot of times, we think, oh, teachers just want the stuff, and they do, and we should give them the stuff. And that is another dream of mine. My dream is to have my own publishing company where I'm really creating this coherent curriculum or taking curriculum and making it more coherent in a justice-oriented way, but also always training teachers on what it means to think with critical theory. And I think people think that that should be saved for the curriculum writers, the researchers, the scholars, but I think not only teachers can think with critical theory, but so can students. But we just have to try. We have to do it. We have to. It's again, it's easier said than done.
I love all of those dreams. Those are great. I also recognize that you and your research and experience have worked with so many educators, and I'm curious about kind of the mindset shift of whether it's going from like overwhelmed to like clear on how exactly to design curriculum that is justice centered in social studies, or if it's I'm not sure about this, or if it's the kind of leader mindset shift around like how do we structurally support
Yeah.
this work? Like, what's a key mindset shift you've noticed in actually bringing to life some justice centered curriculum in social studies?
Fantastic question, because you are right. There are numerous barriers to doing this comprehensively, to doing justice-oriented social studies curriculum, to do it sustainably. The barriers are plenty. Teachers are worried about, do I know enough? They don't feel like their social studies curriculum was good enough, so they feel like they often say, "How do I teach what I don't know? I know I need to teach counter narratives, but how do I do that?" Um, and the barriers of, yes, then of course there are many restrictive contexts, especially in our sociopolitical current state, that people are really scared to even say the word equity or justice in some spaces. Then there's the organizational fragmentation. Okay, so I could go on and on about all. I just want to validate that those are real challenges, and I don't want teachers to feel like I'm not doing this, so there's must be a problem with me, or I'm not committed enough, or, I don't actually think that this is a teacher commitment issue. I mean, it can be, and some, but most teachers really do want their students to they want to provide a responsible, engaging, and comprehensive multiple perspectives type of social studies curriculum, but they just are like really scattered on how to do it. So a mindset shift in terms of well, with the teachers that I worked with, they had this commitment to justice and equity um, and diversity and inclusion and everything. But what they were saying was they when they expressed their scatteredness, their insecurities, their challenges, and then I said, okay, what would it take? What would it take to make you feel confident? And these were teachers. This was like a small team of teachers who were um, they were preparing to overhaul the elementary social studies curriculum in their district, and they felt ill-equipped in the beginning. They felt like, you know, emotionally ready, and except, but they just felt ill-equipped on a more practical level. So, I said, what would it take? And they kind of identified four things. They identified four things that it would take to like get them to actually put it into action. They needed a framework. They needed a guiding tool, some kind of guiding tool that, number one, was actually guided, which was actually grounded in critical theory, that was truly equity oriented and not really, because there's a lot, like again, like what does that mean? Number two, it had to be transferable across identities, topics, and disciplines. So even though I had previously been introducing a lot of identity specific frameworks for like how to teach Black history, how to teach Indigenous history, how to teach something specific within civics or geography. They were like, these are all great, but like our standards and our resources, they don't just teach everything in isolation with these topics or identities. I mean, some standards literally say, what was the interaction between this group, and this group? So you can't just, so there were a lot of questions like, does this Black history framework transfer to the Asian American history? Like it's like it was, so they desired some sort of overarching framework that was transferable across identities. Number three was they wanted it to be sequence sensitive. They felt as if a lot of um, I don't know, leaders and administrators would kind of um, like kind of put down their desire for scopes and sequences for because it sounded like when they were saying we want a scope and sequence, I think they thought the administrators were hearing we want scripts. We just want to be told what to do. But they were like, no, it's not that we just want to be told what to do, but we also what we are doing here with history education is filled with trauma and depressing topics and the topics that could traumatize students in our classroom. If we don't do this right, if we don't think about the order in which we are discussing these topics, we could cause a lot of trauma. So we don't need a step-by-step checklist. We don't need scripted curriculum, but we do want this framework, this guiding framework, to be sensitive to sequencing and help us understand what comes first generally, what comes second, what comes third, what is important when discussing especially really hard histories, or really any histories. Um, and then fourth, the fourth thing that they said this guiding framework would need was it would need to be emotionally balanced. So often they felt as if their social studies curriculum was either really depressing. So if they were talking about something depressing, they felt like bad that they could be causing some trauma for kids in the room. It was just, that's not a good feeling but they also felt like as soon as they got out of the more quote unquote, again, depressing or the oppression stuff, they felt as if they were maybe like whitewashing things. They couldn't, they felt like they know joy is important, so they would go into the joy stuff. But then as soon as they were in the joy stuff, they felt like, oh no, we're like, am I becoming one of those teachers that doesn't really confront and interrogate the oppression involved here? Like, is this too joyous? So they just felt back and forth like they couldn't find. So they said we would really appreciate some emotional balance across this guiding framework. So yeah, so those are the four things that I set out to accomplish to implement into this guiding framework. And fast forward a year later, so months and months later, we together with the teachers, but me going back and forth between scholarship and working implementing the P.O.W.E.R framework with the teachers, we came up with the P.O.W.E.R framework. It stands for different words, but each letter, each word started with a different word at the beginning of the year with me implementing it with the teachers. And then over the course of a year, it sort of evolved and some of the words changed. Because sometimes when you plan a framework with just scholarship, it doesn't necessarily work exactly as you would think it would when you put it into implementation, or the way teachers interpret different critical concepts might be different when you actually. So the words matter a lot, and they shifted over time, but we ended up coming up with a five dimensions that we felt pretty good about in terms of this sequence sensitive, transferable, emotionally balanced, critically grounded framework.
Hi, this is Leah popping in to share the free resource for this episode, the P.O.W.E.R Framework and the Let's Act Framework. You can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/268 or 269. Now back to the show.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm really excited to dive into this. Quickly, I just
Okay.
want to say I think for anyone who feels like they're not quite at the space where your educators were, the ones you were working with who were thinking all these great
Sure.
thoughts, that is such a beautiful cue to be like, here are the important considerations. Like all of these things you listed, right? The fact that it should be grounded in critical theory, it should be like kind of content agnostic, and like the vertical alignment possibilities there is really cool. Like it should sequence to decrease traumatic impact, right? And it should be emotionally balanced with oppression and joy, and considering the whole spectrum of human emotion. Like I
Yeah.
just, it's so good. Like just that. I'm like, that's
Thank you.
amazing. So
I
I would love to actually get into the power framework if you want to just take us
Yeah,
there and tell us
I would love to.
what it's part. Okay, great. Go for it.
Okay, so the P.O.W.E.R framework stands for the P stands for presence and personhood. The O stands for oppression and opposition. The W stands for wisdom and wit. The E stands for entanglements and empowerment. And the R stands for relevance and responsibility. And one of the most common questions I get is like, okay, does this guide like one unit, one lesson, one, like the whole entire year? And the answer is yes, yes, yes. It can do any of those things. The way that I tend to use it was I take, any piece of curriculum, whether it is year long overview or a one children's book or one unit. I am just sort of searching for those pieces. So there are five dimensions, but then two components within each dimension, kind of, that are intricately cannot be separated, sort of. And so I am yeah, looking for those pieces. And the way that I use it is not like to necessarily, again, script something, but to search for what's missing and then say, oh, well, okay, you're really strong with these components, but then one component, let's say wisdom and wit, we're missing. So what can we add in there? Um, but not every single lesson or every single unit can cover all five. Some do. Some children's books can cover all five. Some children's books are really heavy on the P or the O or the R. Okay, so let's get into what these all mean. Okay, so the P, presence and personhood. Presence and personhood dimension acknowledges the presence and explores the personhood of students and those in the curriculum with dignified, asset-oriented origin stories. So, one of the most common pitfalls, especially in elementary social studies education, is the first time that children see Black and Brown people in the official curriculum is through slavery, is they are enslaved, they are in chains. We know through research, we know through all of the experience, we know that this is a traumatic thing for students. It's also just providing a very inaccurate picture of history, of human history, that as if like this is where Black history began. So, one of the most important things to do is uh, the P is, I almost made the P just the word positive, but that doesn't really work. But we have to affirm humanity, identity, culture, lived experience, joy, genius before harm and oppression. We need to center um, the voices of marginalized people the way that they want to be introduced. Um, Stories of we want we want the curriculum to not begin with harm or deficiency, disruption, but we want to affirm that communities have always existed, created, and sustained life beyond domination, and that children enter classrooms as full people already possessing dignity, complexity, agency. So it's about really grounding all of our curriculum in humanity before critique. And it's hard, especially for really justice-oriented teachers. They have actually a really hard time getting away from the oppression stuff. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times where I'm like, this book is great. It's beautiful. But look, there are like 3 pages all about oppression. And this is the first week of school, like, or the third week of school. Like, it's too early. It's, it's, so let's read this book, or even just read part of the book, read the parts that you want. But we really need to make sure that it doesn't seep in. And I think that's really, so presence of person, what I'm really talking about is identity, identity exploration. And oftentimes we think, oh, identity exploration, justice-centered educators want to get into intersectional identity. And by definition, intersectionality is really about intersection with oppression. And so we have to put on some brakes and we have to really think deeper about how can we get into students' identities and the identities of people that we're going to see in the curriculum without bringing oppression in an explicit way. So examples of that are like, for little guys, K through 2, like identity poems, sharing like their name stories, maybe mapping important places in students' lives. And, like if they go deep, they're going to go deep. That's fine. But we don't need to push that. Like, tell me about your racial history, like right away, right in the beginning of the school year. Um, yeah. So, but just like celebrate, the showing, making sure, bringing families into the classroom, talking about their language, their culture. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of ways to explore the students' identities without centering oppression. And then with specific, since I brought up the example of slavery, really starting with ancient Africa, starting before enslavement happened. And there are some phenomenal story books out there that there's one author, her work can be found on ourancestries.com. And there are these beautiful children's books that tell stories about ancient ancient African leaders, mostly kings and queens, but also just different leaders. But they're told the stories are told about when they're little children, and so and they're just experiencing life. That's just it's a story about that any kid could relate to. Like my dad wouldn't let me do this, and so I did that, and then a lot of the units that I wrote with teachers to start out was with these kinds of books, and it was cool because the students could see their own identities in the stories, but and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, like my identity has something to do with ancient history. Like this is yeah. So I really like those those stories, but there's obviously a lot of ways to explore official historical or social studies education without oppression first. But that's, do you have any questions about the presence and personhood
No
dimension?
questions,
Okay.
just like
Let's,
incredible awe and like gratitude, I guess, for
aw.
you taking all of this theory and recognizing what happens in practice often as like something that shouldn't happen in practice, and we know we want to do differently, and here's how to do it, and here's concrete examples. It's just
Yeah,
amazing. Thank you.
that is one of the things in critical theory, and that's how I came up with this framework was I studied all of the critical theories and synthesized them, coded them, and like hundreds and hundreds of them of components within all these critical theories, and and synthesized them into these, five themes. But I didn't find a lot of like components of critical theories that said don't start with oppression. That's a pedagogical thing that I had to bring in. There isn't a lot of order that is attended to. So thank you for recognizing that. It's again like just sometimes it's assumed, I think, but also sometimes I think it's just not where the scholars' brains are. That's just not, yeah. Okay, so you ready for the O?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, so the O stands for oppression and opposition. Originally, I had O standing for just oppression, and then the W was like willpower or something that meant like resistance. And then I realized over time that in practice, if you're when teachers started thinking, okay, I have to read this book up and just center on oppression, that's when we got into that really icky place where we were trying to separate emotion, and it's really impossible, like because there has never been oppression without resistance. And so we need to really teach those together. Um, there are like the teaching hard history standards say that, very explicitly. But the theories about teaching about oppression itself and interrogating power don't talk about that importance of teaching oppression and resistance together. So it was really about bringing the theory and the curricular pedagogical work together. So that's why oppression and opposition, so we examine systems of oppression and resistance together. It means investigating how oppression operates through institutions, policies, ideologies, cultural norms, and at the same time, centering resistance, refusal, critique, counter narratives alongside that harm, and reiterating over and over that oppression has never gone unchallenged. Um, I think that, uh, yeah, I think it's easy to just get stuck into one or the other, but the reality is that they're intertwined. But and then I have a lot of things that I could say that I talk about when doing workshops with teachers about, age appropriateness with the oppression pieces especially. Um, but I think what I've found is teachers feel a little bit more comfortable doing the oppression part, knowing that the opposition is right there with them. And like then it doesn't feel as like when if you're just expected to just teach this, like to really let's examine this, white dominance, or that, it's like very sticky. But if you're talking about it as with resistance, it's okay. But also, we don't want to just talk about resistance. We need to also examine the oppression. So it's a balance, definitely. Do you have any specific questions about that? I mean, there's a lot of examples of what you can do. With the little guys starting out, you can talk about, like, you can ask them about rules and if they think that there are any unfair rules, and notice whose voices are included or excluded in stories. And they they can understand bias and stereotypes and those kinds of things. And then, like, for older elementary students, you can really get a little deeper into analyzing unfair laws or just policies over time, and how schools have. I often talk about it within the context of schools because it's so, familiar to them. But yeah, like how certain languages were excluded and not how there have been welcomed. And there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different books. I have lots of book lists of, like, books that can teach about oppression within these different identity groups. I have books for every dimension of the P.O.W.E.R framework at different grade levels, in other words. But yes, so oppression opposition is, I think most people know that if you're going to do justice-oriented curriculum, you can't, like, it cannot exist without discussing oppression. And that is not discussing oppression. That would be turning a major blind eye to reality and history. And yes.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating the age appropriateness. I feel like I get that question a lot from educators. And I have also seen, I think, in some of your resources on your site, just the acknowledgement that, like, yes, we can talk about oppression when kids are young. It just might look different. And so I love that you just named for us some clear examples. So I think that will alleviate some of the questions the audience might be having. So I really value that.
I have so many things I love to share. I love starting. I have some preventative, like, the biggest fear a lot of teachers have is that, one of the biggest fears when they're concerned about the students in the room. I mean, yes, there's the fear of backlash and but the teachers who, really, most teachers have a big heart and they just want to take care of their students, and they might have, and at least the context that I've worked in, there's usually, like, there's a majority of white students in the room, and then there are a handful, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 students who are Black or brown or come from some kind of historically marginalized community. And teachers are so terrified that that they will say something about the oppressive history, and all the students in the room their heads will turn and look at that 1 to 4 students, and they'll say things like, so wait a minute, then, like, so and so wouldn't be able to go to school with us, say all these things that are just really hard to respond to and could be traumatizing and stuff. So I want to validate that concern and be thankful that people are concerned, thinking about those students. That is who we should be thinking about. But I do have a lot of ideas and strategies on how to prevent that from happening. Specifically practicing it with dolls, but so bringing in a doll that maybe if you, that has an identity from a historically marginalized group, but that isn't in the room. So, like, maybe a doll, if you don't have any children with hijabs or Muslim, then you bring in a doll with a hijab. Or you bring in a doll that, if you don't have any students who have Down syndrome, then you bring in a doll with Down syndrome. And then you say, like, and then you practice, like, okay, we're about to read this book about this. How might we treat this doll, like, this, if this was a student in the room? And that's just one little idea. I could talk about the age appropriateness things for a very long time, so I don't want to get too sidetracked. But I mean, it makes sense that it comes up in the oppression dimension of the P.O.W.E.R framework, because that's the hardest. And
absolutely.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.